My mother once told me that a sister is both your mirror and your opposite. I was 8 when she said it, watching as she brushed my older sister Vanessa's gleaming blonde hair in long, measured strokes. I remember studying our reflections in the vanity mirror, Vanessa radiant at 13, already beautiful in ways I couldn't articulate, and me behind her, ordinary and forgettable. Even then, I understood which one of us was the mirror and which the shadow. "Iris, stop fidgeting and bring me the spray," my mother said without looking at me, her attention fixed on perfecting Vanessa's elaborate hairstyle for the middle school dance. I handed her the hairspray and retreated to my usual position, just outside the spotlight that followed my sister everywhere she went. My name is Iris Calloway, and for 32 years, I have been defined by what I am not Vanessa. Not stunning. Not magnetic. Not special. Until the night everything changed, and the roles we'd played since childhood suddenly reversed. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when my phone rang. Caller ID showed Vanessa, and I felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety her calls always provoked. We spoke rarely these days, perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, and almost always because she needed something. "Hey, Van," I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued slicing carrots. Silence, then a muffled sob. I set down the knife. "Vanessa? What's wrong?" I need help." Her voice was barely recognizable, stripped of its usual confidence. "Everything's gone, Iris. Everything." "What do you mean gone? Where are you?" "Outside your building." I froze. Vanessa had never visited my apartment in the 3 years I'd lived here. She claimed the neighborhood wasn't her scene, which was her polite way of saying it wasn't upscale enough for her tastes. "You're here? Now? Please, can I come up?" I didn't know where else to go. I moved to the window and peered down at the street. There she was, my beautiful, perfect sister, standing on the sidewalk in what appeared to be a cocktail dress, hugging herself against the October chill. No coat. No purse. Her hair, which she normally maintained with religious precision, hung limp around her shoulders. "I'll buzz you in," I said, already moving toward the intercom. "3rd floor, remember?" 5 minutes later, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, I barely recognized the woman standing in the hallway. Vanessa's mascara had left dark trails down her cheeks. Her left eye was swollen, a bruise beginning to form. "Oh my God," I whispered, pulling her inside. "What happened? Who did this to you?" She crumpled against me, her body racked with sobs. "James," she managed between gasping breaths. He lost everything. Our money, the house, everything. And when I confronted him, she gestured vaguely at her face. "James. My brother-in-law of 7 years. The successful investment banker who drove a Tesla and bought Vanessa diamonds for their anniversary. The man who looked at me with barely concealed condescension at family gatherings, as if my modest life as a librarian was a personal affront." "He hit you?" I asked, though the evidence was clear. She nodded, fresh tears spilling. "I didn't know where to go. Mom and Dad are in Europe, and all our friends are really James's friends, and she broke off, her breathing ragged. "I'm sorry. I know we haven't been close, but..." "Shoo," I said, guiding her to the couch. "You don't need to explain. You're my sister." As I wrapped her in a blanket and made tea, acts of care so basic they seemed inadequate, I tried to process what was happening. Vanessa, who had everything I'd ever secretly envied, was now sitting in my small apartment with nothing but the clothes on her back. Vanessa, who had always been the sun our family orbited around, was now seeking warmth from me. "Can you tell me what happened?" I asked gently, setting a mug of chamomile tea in front of her. "Take your time." She clutched the mug like a lifeline, her manicured nails, now chipped, clicking against the ceramic. "James has been acting strange for months," she began, her voice steadier. "Tense. Secretive. I thought he was having an affair." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I almost wish he had been." She took a sip of tea, wincing as the hot liquid touched her split lip, another injury I hadn't noticed initially. "We were hosting a dinner party tonight. Everything was perfect, the caterers, the wine, my dress." She glanced down at the navy blue cocktail dress she wore, now wrinkled and tear-stained. "Then 2 men showed up. They looked official. James took them into his study." She paused, her gaze distant, reliving the moment. "When they left, he was. I've never seen him like that, Iris. He told everyone to leave. Just, mid-dinner, everyone out. After the guests were gone, he started drinking. Really drinking. When I asked what was happening, he said." She swallowed hard. "He said we were ruined. That the SEC was investigating him for fraud. That everything we owned was about to be seized." The gravity of her situation began to sink in. This wasn't a temporary setback or a marital spat. This was complete devastation. "I told him we would get through it," she continued. "That we had each other, that material things didn't matter." He laughed at me. Called me a stupid, useless trophy wife who wouldn't survive a day without his money. Her hands trembled so violently that tea sloshed over the rim of the mug. I gently took it from her and set it on the coffee table. "He was so angry, Iris. I've never seen him like that. When I tried to calm him down, he just snapped. Hit me. Then he told me to get out, that he never wanted to see me again." Her voice broke. "I didn't even have my purse. My phone was in my coat pocket. I just ran." "How did you get here?" I asked, trying to piece together the logistics. "I remembered your address from the Christmas card. I had $20 in my dress pocket from the valet tip earlier. I took the subway." The image of my sister, who insisted on car services for even the shortest distances, riding the subway in a cocktail dress with a bruised face made my chest ache. "You're safe now," I assured her, though the words felt hollow. How could anyone be safe after their entire world imploded? "You can stay here as long as you need." Vanessa looked around my apartment, the cramped living room with its second-hand furniture, the galley kitchen visible through the archway, the single bedroom whose door stood ajar. All of it would fit in the foyer of her Westchester mansion. "I didn't know where else to go," she repeated, as if apologizing for imposing on my modest life. "You came to the right place," I said firmly. Later, as Vanessa slept fitfully in my bed, I had insisted, planning to take the couch, I sat at my small kitchen table and tried to make sense of the evening's events. My sister's perfect life had been a castle built on sand. Her handsome, successful husband was apparently a criminal. And now she was here, in my apartment, with nothing. I should have felt vindicated. After years of being the lesser sister, the plain one, the quiet one, the one whose achievements were footnotes to Vanessa's headline, I was now the stable one. The one with a roof over her head and money in the bank. The rescuer rather than the one in need of rescue. But all I felt was a profound sadness. Not just for Vanessa's plight, but for the revelation that the success I'd envied had been as fragile as spun sugar. I had spent so many years measuring my life against hers and finding mine wanting. How much energy had I wasted coveting something that wasn't real? My phone lit up with a text. It was from my colleague at the library, responding to the message I'd sent earlier saying I needed to take a personal day tomorrow. No problem. Everything okay? I stared at the 3 dots blinking on my screen. How could I possibly explain what was happening? Finally, I typed. Family emergency. Will explain later. Thanks. Family emergency. The phrase felt inadequate for the seismic shift that had just occurred in both our lives. From the bedroom came a soft whimper. I moved quietly to the doorway and saw Vanessa curled into a tight ball, her face contorted even in sleep. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without the armor of her perfect life. In that moment, I made a decision. For 32 years, I had been defined by my relationship to Vanessa, the lesser sister, the shadow to her light. But now, when everything else had been stripped away, we were just 2 women bound by blood and shared history. And I would not fail her, no matter how complicated our past. I would help my sister rebuild. Not because I owed her, but because beneath the envy and the distance, I loved her. Always had. The challenge would be helping her without losing myself in the process. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from a lifetime in Vanessa's shadow, it was that I had value beyond comparison. And this time, as we navigated this crisis together, I needed to remember that. The first week was the hardest. Vanessa alternated between periods of stunned silence and bouts of panicked crying. She refused to go to the police about James's assault, terrified of the public humiliation that would follow. "You don't understand," she said when I gently pressed the issue. "Everyone will know. It'll be in the papers. Wife of disgraced financier claims domestic abuse." "I can't, Iris. I just can't." I didn't push further. Instead, I focused on practical matters, buying her essentials like clothes and toiletries, helping her cancel credit cards she could no longer access, and setting up a temporary phone on my plan after James disconnected her service. On the 4th day, Vanessa finally showered and dressed in the simple clothes I'd purchased for her, jeans and a sweater, nothing like the designer wardrobe she was accustomed to. She emerged from the bathroom looking strangely young, her face bare of makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "I need to find a job," she announced, her voice hollow but determined. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been managing my own work remotely. "Okay. What kind of job are you thinking?" Her expression crumpled. "I don't know. I don't know how to do anything." "That's not true," I said automatically, though as the words left my mouth, I realized I wasn't sure what skills Vanessa possessed. She had majored in communications in college but had never really used her degree. After graduation, she'd worked briefly at a PR firm before meeting James and transitioning to what she called her real job as his wife, planning dinner parties, decorating their home, serving on charity boards. "I've spent the last 7 years being James's accessory," she said, echoing my thoughts. "My resume might as well list professional trophy wife as my occupation." "You're smart," I insisted. "You're personable. You just need to figure out what you want to do." She laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. "What I want to do is go back in time and not marry a criminal who was going to ruin my life." I didn't have a response for that. The following day, as I prepared to return to work at the library, I found Vanessa at the kitchen table, scrolling through news articles on the tablet I'd loaned her. Her expression was grim. "It's official," she said, turning the screen toward me. "James has been arrested. It's everywhere." I scanned the headline: Prominent financier James Edgerton arrested for securities fraud, money laundering. The article detailed how James had allegedly been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme for years, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors while siphoning millions for himself. The FBI had seized their home, their cars, their bank accounts, everything. "There's a picture of me from last year's charity gala," Vanessa said, her voice flat. "They're calling me the unwitting spouse. Like I'm some kind of idiot who had no idea what was happening right under my nose." "You didn't know," I said. "Didn't I?" Her eyes met mine, filled with self-loathing. "I never questioned where the money came from. Never wondered how we could afford the house, the cars, the vacations. I just enjoyed it." I sat beside her, searching for the right words. "Van, you trusted your husband. That doesn't make you complicit." "No, but it makes me willfully blind." She pushed the tablet away. "And now I have nothing. Worse than nothing, I have a toxic name. Who's going to hire James Edgerton's wife?" It was a fair question, and I didn't have an immediate answer. But I did know one thing: Vanessa was more than James Edgerton's wife. She just needed to remember that. "Use your maiden name," I suggested. "You're Vanessa Calloway. You always have been." Something shifted in her expression, recognition, perhaps, of the identity she'd set aside when she married James. She nodded slowly. "Vanessa Calloway," she repeated, as if testing how it felt to reclaim herself. As I left for work, I couldn't shake the image of Vanessa sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by the wreckage of her former life. She had always been the bright center of any room, commanding attention effortlessly. Now she seemed diminished, uncertain of her place in the world. I returned that evening to find the apartment spotless. Dinner was simmering on the stove, a simple pasta dish, but the aroma filled the small space invitingly. "You cooked," I said, unable to hide my surprise. In all the years I'd known her, I had never seen Vanessa prepare a meal. "I found a recipe online," she said, stirring the sauce. "I figured it was time I started pulling my weight around here." The meal was surprisingly good. As we ate, Vanessa told me she'd spent the day applying for jobs online, administrative positions, customer service roles, anything that might overlook her lack of recent experience. "I also called Mom and Dad," she added, not meeting my eyes. "They're cutting their trip short. They'll be home next week." Our parents had been traveling through Europe for the past month, a retirement gift to themselves. I had debated whether to contact them about Vanessa's situation but had decided it was her news to share when she was ready. "How did they take it?" I asked. Vanessa poked at her pasta. "Mom cried. Dad was quiet, which means he's furious, probably at himself for not seeing through James." She glanced up at me. "They asked about you. How you're doing, taking care of me like this." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Our parents had always viewed me as the responsible one, the steady one, which in the context of our family dynamic meant the boring one. I could already imagine how this would play out in their minds: reliable Iris, stepping up to help her glamorous but fallen sister. "They said I was lucky to have you," Vanessa continued, her voice softening. "And they're right. I am." The sincerity in her tone caught me off guard. Compliments from Vanessa were rare, not because she was deliberately unkind, but because she had always existed in a different stratosphere, one where I was barely visible. "We're family," I said simply, echoing what I'd told her the night she arrived. "It's what we do." But as the days stretched into weeks, I began to question the boundaries of that family obligation. Vanessa had taken over my apartment, her toiletries crowding the bathroom counter, her newly purchased budget clothes filling my closet, her preferences dictating our shared meals. She had transformed my tidy, quiet space into a reflection of herself, just as she had done with our childhood home. I found myself staying later at the library, volunteering for extra shifts, anything to delay returning to an apartment that no longer felt entirely mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of living in Vanessa's shadow, I had finally created a life that was wholly mine, only to have her crash into it and reshape it in her image once again. The simmering resentment I felt made me ashamed. Vanessa had lost everything. She was trying her best to rebuild, applying for jobs daily despite constant rejection, learning to live within constraints she'd never experienced before. Who was I to begrudge her the small comforts she found in arranging my living space or choosing what we ate for dinner? Yet the old patterns were reasserting themselves. I was accommodating her needs, sublimating my own desires, allowing myself to be reduced to a supporting character in the drama of Vanessa's life. Things came to a head one evening when I returned home to find a stranger in my living room, a sleek, professional-looking woman with a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Iris," Vanessa exclaimed as I stood frozen in the doorway. "This is Charlotte Winters." She was on the hospital charity board with me. "Charlotte, this is my sister Iris." Charlotte gave me a carefully calibrated smile. "Vanessa's told me so much about you. It's so generous of you to take her in during this difficult time." The way she said difficult time made it clear she was selecting the most delicate term possible for James's criminal activities and Vanessa's subsequent fall from grace. "Charlotte might have a job opportunity for me," Vanessa explained, her eyes bright with an excitement I hadn't seen since before that night on the sidewalk. "In her husband's real estate office." "Administrative support," Charlotte clarified. "Nothing glamorous, but it would be a start." I nodded mechanically, mumbling something about it sounding like a good opportunity. But inside, a storm was brewing. This was my home, my private space, and Vanessa had invited a virtual stranger into it without even texting me first. Moreover, she'd done it to network, to leverage a connection from her old life, a life built on fraud. After Charlotte left, I confronted Vanessa. "You should have asked before inviting someone over." She blinked, genuinely confused. "Why?" It was just Charlotte. "Because this is my apartment, Vanessa. My home." The words came out sharper than I intended, years of repressed frustration finding release. "You can't just take over my space like you've taken over everything else my entire life." Hurt flashed across her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means." I struggled to articulate feelings I'd buried for decades. "It means that I've always lived in your shadow. Always been the other Callaway girl. The one who wasn't as pretty or as charismatic or as special. And I've finally built a life for myself that isn't defined by you, and now you're here, and it's happening all over again." Vanessa stared at me, stunned. "Is that really how you see our relationship? That I've somehow overshadowed you?" "How could I not?" I demanded. "From the time we were children, you were the sun and I was just background radiation. Do you know what Mom said when I got accepted to library school? At least you'll always have a stable job. Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just acknowledgement that I'd chosen something practical because I didn't have your options." Vanessa sank onto the couch, her face pale. "I didn't know you felt that way." "How could you know?" I asked, deflating slightly. "You were too busy being Vanessa. It's not even your fault, not really. It's just who you are. Who we've always been in relation to each other. A long silence stretched between us, filled with 3 decades of unspoken truths. I'm sorry, Vanessa finally said, her voice small. I never meant to make you feel less than. I sighed, the anger draining out of me. I know you didn't. And I'm sorry for unloading all this on you now, when you're already dealing with so much. She shook her head. No, I needed to hear it. She looked around the apartment, seeing it with new eyes. You're right. I have been taking over, haven't I? Just like I always do. It's a small space, I offered, already regretting my outburst. We're bound to step on each other's toes. That's not it, though. Vanessa met my gaze directly. You're right about our dynamic. I've always been the center of attention, and you've always been the one accommodating me. Even now, when I've lost everything and you've been incredibly generous, I'm still acting like the world revolves around me. She stood up, resolution in her bearing. I'm going to find my own place. Van, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Not just because you need your space back, but because I need to stand on my own 2 feet. Charlotte's husband is willing to give me a chance. It's not a high-paying job, but it's something. I can find a room to rent, maybe with a roommate. Are you sure? I asked, conflicted. As much as I wanted my space back, I also worried about Vanessa on her own. She had never lived independently, moving from our parents' home to college dorms to James's mansion. She nodded, a new determination in her eyes. I'm sure. It's time I learned who Vanessa Calloway really is, without James or Mom and Dad or you to define me. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Vanessa's soft breathing from the couch, I replayed our conversation. For the first time in our relationship, we had spoken honestly about the dynamic that had shaped both our lives. It felt both terrifying and liberating. I realized that I had been as complicit in our pattern as Vanessa. I had allowed myself to be relegated to the shadows, had accepted the role of the lesser sister without protest. Yes, Vanessa had always commanded attention, but I had never demanded my share of it. Perhaps this crisis was an opportunity for both of us to redefine ourselves and our relationship to each other. Over the next month, Vanessa threw herself into her new job with surprising dedication. She worked long hours for modest pay, learning the intricacies of real estate administration from the ground up. When she wasn't working, she scoured apartment listings, searching for something she could afford on her entry-level salary. I watched her transformation with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. This was a woman who had once refused to fly commercial, who had a personal shopper at Bergdorf's, who considered a day without a manicure a personal failure. Now she was bringing home leftovers from the office to save money and carefully budgeting for a security deposit on a studio apartment. I found a place, she announced one evening, her expression a mixture of excitement and trepidation. It's tiny, and the neighborhood isn't great, but the super seems nice and it's close to the train. I studied the listing she showed me on her phone. The apartment was indeed small, even smaller than mine, and in a neighborhood I wouldn't have chosen myself. But it was clean and affordable. Are you sure about this? I asked. You could stay here longer if you wanted. She shook her head. I'm sure. It's time. Her eyes met mine. But thank you. For everything. The day Vanessa moved out was strangely emotional. She had so few possessions now, just the clothes I'd helped her buy, a few books, the second-hand laptop she'd purchased with her first paycheck. Everything fit into 2 suitcases. I'll help you settle in, I offered as we loaded the suitcases into the Uber. Actually, she said hesitantly, I think I need to do this part on my own. Is that okay? I recognized the request for what it was, not a rejection, but a necessary step in her journey toward independence. Of course. But I'm just a phone call away if you need anything. She hugged me then, a real embrace, not the air kisses she had favored in her previous life. I know. And that means everything. After she left, I stood in my quiet apartment, feeling both relieved and oddly bereft. For the first time in 6 weeks, I was alone again, my space restored to me. Yet something had shifted fundamentally in my relationship with Vanessa. The old dynamics had been disrupted, creating space for something new to emerge. I didn't hear from Vanessa for 3 days after she moved, the longest we'd gone without contact since the night she appeared on my doorstep. When she finally called, her voice brimmed with a quiet pride that surprised me. I built a bookshelf, she announced without preamble. From IKEA. All by myself. I laughed, genuinely delighted by her accomplishment. Congratulations. That's more than I've ever managed. Mine always end up with extra screws. Oh, I definitely have extra screws, she admitted. But it's standing, and that's what matters, right? Absolutely. There was a pause, then, would you want to come over for dinner this weekend? I'm learning to cook. Nothing fancy, but I make a decent stir-fry now. The invitation touched me deeply. This wasn't Vanessa summoning me to witness her glory, as she might have in the past. This was a genuine desire to share her new life with me, humble as it was. I'd love that, I said. Vanessa's apartment was exactly as the listing had shown, tiny, basic, with windows that faced a brick wall. But she had already made it her own in subtle ways. A colorful throw pillow brightened the futon that served as her couch. A potted plant sat on the windowsill. And yes, a slightly lopsided bookshelf stood against one wall, holding a small collection of books and a framed photo of the two of us as children, one I didn't even remember existed. It's not much, she said, watching my face anxiously. But it's mine. I pay for it myself. It's perfect, I told her sincerely. The stir-fry was surprisingly good, though Vanessa apologized repeatedly for its simplicity. We ate at her small folding table, drinking box wine from plastic cups, and talked more honestly than we had in years. I miss some things, she admitted as we washed dishes together in her minuscule kitchen. Not the material stuff so much, but the security. Knowing exactly what each day would look like. I handed her a plate to dry. That's understandable. You had a whole life mapped out. A false one. She dried the plate with methodical strokes. I built my identity around being James's wife, having nice things, being envied. Without all that, I had to figure out who I actually am. And? I prompted. Who is Vanessa Calloway? She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Still figuring that out. But I know she's stronger than I thought. More capable. She glanced around her small apartment. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined living like this. Now I'm almost proud of it. Because I did it myself. As the evening wound down, I found myself reluctant to leave. This new version of my sister, humbler, more self-aware, genuinely interested in my life and thoughts, was someone I wanted to spend time with. We should do this regularly, I suggested as I prepared to leave. Maybe alternate between your place and mine? I'd like that. Vanessa hesitated, then added, I've been thinking about what you said, about always being in my shadow. I want you to know I see you, Iris. I see how amazing you are, how you've built this whole life on your own terms. I just didn't appreciate it before because it didn't match my warped idea of success. The words I had waited a lifetime to hear from my sister. Thank you, I managed, my throat tight with unexpected emotion. As I rode the subway home, I reflected on the strange path that had led us here. Vanessa's catastrophe had forced both of us to confront the patterns that had defined our relationship since childhood. Her fall from grace had created space for me to step out of her shadow. And perhaps, paradoxically, my stable, ordinary life had provided her with a foundation from which to rebuild. A month later, our parents finally returned from Europe, having extended their trip despite Vanessa's revelation. I wasn't surprised, crisis management had never been their strong suit, especially when it involved public embarrassment. We met them for dinner at a moderately priced restaurant, a compromise between Vanessa's new budget constraints and our parents' expectations. I watched as they took in the changes in their golden child, the simpler clothes, the absence of expensive jewelry, the new self-containment in her bearing. Darling, you look, well, our mother said, clearly struggling to reconcile this version of Vanessa with the glamorous daughter she remembered. Considering everything. I am well, Mom, Vanessa replied with quiet dignity. Different, but well. This whole situation is just disgraceful, our father muttered, his face flushing with renewed anger. That bastard James. If I ever see him again. Dad, Vanessa interrupted gently. It's over. I've moved on. Our parents exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this measured response. They had expected tears, perhaps, or bitter recriminations. Not this calm acceptance. And you, Iris? Our mother asked, turning to me almost as an afterthought. How are you handling all this? Before I could respond, Vanessa spoke up. Iris has been my rock. She took me in when I had nothing, helped me find my way back to myself. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I don't know what I would have done without her. The naked affection and gratitude in her voice silenced our parents momentarily. This dynamic, Vanessa praising me, centering me in the conversation, was entirely new. Well, our father said after a moment, clearly uncomfortable with this revision of the familiar family script. That's what sisters are for, isn't it? No, Vanessa said firmly. It's who Iris is. Kind. Generous. Steady. All the qualities I took for granted because I was too busy being the center of attention. Our mother's eyes widened at this frank self-assessment. Things are different now, Vanessa continued. I'm different. And I'm still figuring out who this new version of me is going to be. But I know I want to be more like Iris, someone who builds their life on substance, not surface. I felt a flush rise to my cheeks, and used to being the focus of such praise, especially from Vanessa. I think you're doing just fine being you, I said quietly. The real you. Our parents watched this exchange with bewilderment, their understanding of the natural order, Vanessa shining, me supporting, completely upended. The rest of the dinner passed in relative calm, our parents gradually adjusting to the new reality of their daughter's relationship. As we parted outside the restaurant, our mother pulled me aside. You've done a wonderful thing for your sister, she said, patting my arm. Always the responsible one. I bristled slightly at the familiar characterization. I didn't do it to be responsible, Mom. I did it because I love her. Of course, dear. She smiled vaguely, unable to fully process this disruption to her understanding of her daughters. Well, you've always been close, haven't you? We hadn't, and she knew it. But the fiction was more comfortable than the truth, that it had taken complete disaster for Vanessa and me to see each other clearly. As Vanessa and I walked to the subway together, a light rain beginning to fall, she linked her arm through mine. That was exhausting, she admitted. They still don't see us, do they? Not really. No, I agreed. But maybe that doesn't matter as much anymore. She nodded, considering this. Because we see each other. Exactly. We paused at the entrance to the subway station, the rain falling more steadily now. I have something for you, Vanessa said suddenly, digging in her bag. She pulled out a small, wrapped package. It's not much, but... I opened it to find a delicate silver bracelet with a small book charm. It's to say thank you, she explained. For everything. And to remind you that I see you now. Who you really are. I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. Not because of the gift itself, but because of what it represented, Vanessa seeing me not as an extension of herself or a supporting character in her story, but as a whole person with my own value. Thank you, I said simply. As we parted ways, each heading to our respective apartments, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. The old dynamic, Vanessa in the spotlight, me in the shadows, had been permanently disrupted. In its place was something more balanced, more honest. A relationship where we could both shine in our own ways, neither diminishing the other. My mother's words from long ago echoed in my mind, a sister is both your mirror and your opposite. Perhaps that was true, but not in the way I had always interpreted it. Vanessa was not my opposite because she was exceptional while I was ordinary. We were opposites in the way of puzzle pieces, different but complementary, each with our own strengths and weaknesses. And now, finally, we were learning to see those differences not as a hierarchy of worth, but as the unique qualities that made us who we were. 6 months after that rain-soaked evening, Vanessa and I sat on the tiny balcony of her new apartment, a slight upgrade from the first, with an actual bedroom and this stamp-sized outdoor space that she treasured. She had been promoted at work, her natural charm and unexpected work ethic earning her recognition beyond her initial administrative role. I have something to tell you, she said, fidgeting with her coffee mug. I've been offered a position managing client relations. It would mean more money, more responsibility. Van, that's amazing. I exclaimed. You deserve it. Thanks, she smiled, then hesitated. There's more. I've been seeing someone. His name is David. He's an architect I met through work. Is it serious? I asked, sensing there was more to this revelation. Maybe. But what matters is that he knows everything about James, the fraud, my fall from grace, and he still sees me. The real me. Her eyes met mine. The way you always have, even when I was too self-absorbed to notice. I reached across the small table to squeeze her hand. I'm happy for you, Van. Truly. I wouldn't be here without you, she said softly. Not just the practical help, though that saved my life. But you showed me who I could be when everything external was stripped away. You showed me who I could be too, I replied. That I didn't have to stay in the shadows. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city skyline. Two sisters, no longer defined by comparison to each other, but by the strength we'd found together. The shadow she cast had once felt endless. Now it was simply the natural companion to light, neither good nor bad, just part of the complete picture that made up our shared story.